Welcome back. At least 35 people have died, while dozens more have been injured as freezing rain and unexpected snowfall hit remote areas of Pakistan. 22 children are among the fatalities, many of whom were crushed in landslides that buried their homes. The heavy rains also damaged at least 150 houses and partially destroyed 500 others, cutting off electricity in some districts. The extreme weather, which hit Pakistan's northern and western regions, surprised experts and residents who are used to the humid weather in the month of March. A former director of the country's meteorological department, Mushtaq al-Shah, explained that a light hailstorm that lasts a few moments would not be as surprising, but it's unusual for that to continue for over 30 minutes. As no one more grateful than former U.S. President Donald Trump, on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that his name should appear on the ballots for the presidential election in November, striking down Colorado's efforts to disqualify him from running for president. A top court ruled that only Congress has the power to strike the former president from the ballot under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The unsigned unanimous ruling is a significant win for Trump, whose presidential campaign can now proceed without roadblocks erected by individual state courts or election officials. However, they did not opine on whether Mr. Trump had in fact engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. They did not discuss whether the attack on the U.S. Capitol by the former president's supporters constituted an insurrection at all. Trump thanked the Supreme Court for the ruling, calling for full immunity for not just him, but any other president.
Respect for the Supreme Court, and I want to just thank them for working so quickly and so diligently and so brilliantly. And again, this is a unifying factor. Everybody now is together, and they can go after me as a politician, they can go after me with votes, but they're not going to go after me with that kind of lawsuit that takes somebody out of a race who's leading in this case, but even if the person wasn't leading. And another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president, because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office or even before they leave office. A president has to be free. A president has to be, if the president does a good job, I did. Some people would say a great job. But if the president does a good job, a president should be free and clear and frankly celebrated for having done a good job. Not indicted 4 times. And some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that as a president, that some decisions to make are very tough. I took out ISIS, and I took out some very big people from the standpoint of a different part of the world. 2 of the leading terrorists, probably the 2 leading terrorists ever that we've ever seen in this world. And those are big decisions. I don't want to be prosecuted for it.
The Supreme Court ruling came just in time for Super Tuesday today in the United States. That's a day when voters in 15 states are poised to cast their ballots for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. There are 13 primaries and 2 caucuses set to take place, with 874 delegates at stake for the 2 GOP candidates still in the race. That's former President Donald Trump and former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. It's the biggest voting day of the 2024 presidential election, and Trump comes into it with wins in all but one of the Republican contests held so far. Haley notched a win in the District of Columbia's primary on Sunday and a commanding lead in the delegates' race. For many of the states, polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. We'll be talking about this a bit later, but an Air National Guard member has pleaded guilty to posting dozens of classified documents online in one of the highest profile intelligence leaks in recent years. Prosecutors recommend the 22-year-old Jack Texera be sentenced to up to 16 years and 8 months in prison. While working at an Air National Guard base, he posted documents to Discord, a platform popular with gamers. The material included maps, satellite images, and intelligence on U.S. allies. Texera pleaded guilty to 6 counts of willful retention and transmission of national defense information in a U.S. federal court in Boston today. And while there have been reactions to U.S. Airman Aaron Bushnell's self-immolation on February 25th, Veterans for Peace New York City chapter member James Williams described Bushnell's actions as brave and courageous. We remember on that day, Bushnell set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., while shouting, "Free Palestine." 4 months since the start of Israel's ground incursion on Gaza, Bushnell denounced what he referred to as genocide and expressed solidarity with the suffering of Palestinians. During the Vietnam War, monks were seen burning themselves to protest against persecution of Buddhists by the South Vietnamese government, which was backed by the U.S.
And the thing that I pray for every night is that the Israelis and the Palestinians and Arabs will find some way to both live in peace on that land, whatever it is. I don't know what it's going to be, but I guess I'm favoring the two-state solution. Which, of course, Netanyahu is never, and the far right are never going to agree to. But somehow Israel has, and they have to find some way of living on peace in that land. Otherwise, I think it's going to end up destroying that. It's going to grow and go into a wider conflict. And I think, with the possibility of even nuclear war and World War III, I think if something doesn't happen very soon, it's going to be a disaster for the world. Well, I think it was a very brave and courageous thing that he did. It reminded me of during the Vietnam era of all the monks who burned themselves to protest the war. And that certainly had a major impact here on people. And I think that it might do the same here. It certainly... It's not something I would do. I wouldn't have that kind of courage. I certainly have just as strong feelings about what's going on as he does, but I would never have the courage to do what he did. And so, from what I could see, it's having an impact on people I talked to. I drove home the important message that he was trying to get across.
Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. Maria, well, great to see you. I'll see you soon, I guess. Super Tuesday is finally here. How is voting going so far?
Super Tuesday is here. Voting is underway. We will probably be seeing some early predictions come in around 6 or 7 o'clock in the Eastern Standard Time. It is one of the biggest days for the election season. This is really going to predict for many what we will see in the general election. So many people are getting out to vote. There's the majority of the states across the country are participating. There are not only the presidential seats, but there are several delegate seats and obviously local elections as well. So it's a very pivotal time for America, especially as it relates to the government and governing and who will be leading, whether it's the national government and the White House or whether or not it is the local officials that have a heavy impact on some of the very basic concerns of American citizens.
Yeah, and I imagine the former U.S. President Donald Trump will be really excited to head to the polls, and we'll be looking forward to the results at the end of today. Let's talk about the Supreme Court ruling over Trump's participation in this election. He nearly lost it, Maria, didn't he, before being saved by the Supreme Court?
Yes, it was a unanimous vote, and they are stating that it is not legal for a state to remove him off the ballot. And so this is going to definitely have him and his campaign team looking to clinching that Republican nomination.
Yeah, and it is a major win for him, but it doesn't take away all of his legal woes, does it, Maria? He still has, some legal battles to face.
You're exactly correct. It does not take away his legal woes, but what it does is it puts him in a position where if there is no legal um, conviction that he receives that could make him ineligible, then we would definitely see him pushing forward with providing presidents with immunity, and he would be putting in laws in place that would almost disregard what a president does, but allowing them to be able to receive immunity from these type of cases. So this could be definitely something that it would be historical in nature, but you can also rest assured that we are going to see Congress, because they are the only other entity that could potentially bring a case against him, that could potentially remove him. We haven't seen that in almost 100 years or more in the United States, but there is a precedence for Congress bringing forth a case that could cause him to not be eligible for the ballot.
Just wondering if they'll make it in time before November. But I'm sure that this also strengthens Trump's resolve and the party's position to have him run as the party's representative in the November elections. I have to ask again, Maria, who is Trump leaning towards for a running mate?
We've not seen very clear signs as to who he's leaning to. Obviously, as you know, most of his administration from before, we will not see him leaning toward, individuals like Rudy Giuliani, who've been a part of major legal ramifications as a result of that. We could even be surprised to see it's someone that's a close confidant, almost someone that it would be almost family. And so I think that there are so many individuals that have ran into legal challenges as a result of being a confidant of his, that we can expect that probably after this evening, we will begin to see a whole new set of individuals that we would be looking to potentially see as his running mate.
If I could just pick your brains on this just a little bit, Maria, the U.S. airman pleading guilty to Pentagon documents leak, Jack Teixeira, how detrimental were his actions to the Pentagon and to U.S. security?
Well, they're saying that these are some of the most detrimental release of classified documentation of history. And so these documents are released through a gaming site and a gaming exchange are going to definitely put him in a position where he will be seeing long prison time. The question, though, is the United States at any potential risk currently as a result of that leak?
Thanks again, Maria. We'll catch up with you later. Well, let's segue now to Africa. Two people have died after two planes collided in Nairobi, Kenya. 44 other people, many of them passengers of one of the planes, escaped unharmed in the incident on Tuesday morning. One of the planes involved is a Dash 8 owned by Safari Link bound for Diani with 44 passengers and crew. The other is a Cessna plane on a training session carrying two people. The Cessna crashed in the park while the Dash 8 safely landed back at Wilson Airport. According to officials, both planes had taken off from Wilson Airport. The UK's Rwanda Asylum Bill has suffered defeat in the House of Lords. It was meant to ensure a safe country for deportees to sidestep a Supreme Court ruling which declared the East African country unsuitable. On Monday, the House of Lords passed 5 amendments to the draft text, which, if ratified, would make it harder for the House of Commons to declare Rwanda safe and would require the government to comply with domestic and international law. There were 277 votes in favor of establishing a mechanism to monitor whether Rwanda is safe to 167 in opposition. Early in January, most British lawmakers approved the controversial bill before their colleagues in the upper chamber voted to delay it. The bill compels judges to regard Rwanda as a safe country and gives ministers the power to disregard parts of the Human Rights Act. And for accepting to receive deportees, Kigali has so far pocketed $300 million from London. In other news, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says climate change disproportionately impacts women farmers in low and middle income countries, causing billions of dollars of losses among female-headed farming households. And this therefore widens the income gap among the rural poor. This was revealed in a groundbreaking report by the FAO called The Unjust Climate, Measuring the Impacts of Climate Change on the Rural Poor, Women and Youth. The reports combined socio-economic data from over 950 million rural people across 24 countries with over 70 years of climate data to quantify how extreme weather are adversely impacting female-headed households and livelihoods to a greater degree than those headed by males.
Climate change it's not stopping, it's accelerating. So if we had another 1 degree Celsius change in the climate, it means that over time women would lose 34% more of income than men in situations in middle and low income countries where there's already a lot of stress on these households to produce enough income to feed their families and to pursue their livelihoods. Climate change is a major challenge for poor people, and particularly for women. And it's a challenge for women because they can't easily adapt to climate change as men can, because they don't have as much access to resources, to assets, to services that would allow them to adapt to the challenges that a changing climate poses. For example, women don't often have as much ownership of land as men. Women may not have access to technology like drought-resistant seeds. What's really important is to design investments and to increase the amount of money that's going towards projects which not only address these kind of asset and resource gaps, but also try to transform social norms or empower women so that they have more agency to make decisions for their family. Because we know that doing that can have really big benefits in terms of household level incomes, dietary diversity, food security, and resilience.
Well, let's recap on that story about the UK's Rwanda Asylum bill, which suffered defeat in the House of Lords. It was meant to ensure a safe country for deportees to sidestep a Supreme Court ruling which declared the East African country unsuitable. But on Monday, the House of Lords passed 5 amendments to the draft text, which, if ratified, would make it harder for the House of Commons to declare Rwanda safe and would require the government to comply with domestic and international law. Let's bring in barrister and immigration specialist Tassadat Hussein. He joins us from Manchester. Tassadat, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Good afternoon, and thank you for asking me to join.
Well, it's great to see you. Why are British lawmakers against this bill?
The simple reason is that the bill fails to comply with international law and our own Human Rights Act. And as a consequence of that, the minute the bill is passed and enacted and flights are take off from the UK to Rwanda, we are breaking international law. And Parliament and many human rights groups within the UK and internationally are outraged by that prospect. In addition to that, the bill itself was passed in immediate response to the Supreme Court's ruling, the highest domestic court in the United Kingdom, who deemed the original Rwanda scheme to be unlawful. And the British government then passed the bill, or rather drafted the bill, and are attempting to pass the bill through Parliament to declare that Rwanda is in fact safe, thereby directly contradicting the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and many would argue transgressing what's typically known as the separation of powers, in which the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, between 3 of them, are a check and a balance on each other. And that's extremely concerning from a constitutional perspective.
Yeah, and I imagine that, the reason Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is pushing for this bill to be ratified is it poses a solution to illegal migration in the country, and I'm wondering why this is not appealing enough to lawmakers.
Well, that's Rishi Sunak's perspective. It doesn't actually pose any solution, and there are several reasons why. But the most important reason is that the Rwanda scheme itself is only designed to take about 250 people in total. The cost per person is currently at £1.8 million. In addition to that, if the Rwandan government, having received an asylum seeker, decide that he or she is not suited, then they can send that individual back. So it's a very expensive scheme. It doesn't really deal with the core issue, which is to process asylum claims, for which there are, around about 175,000 the last time I looked, outstanding. And that isn't because we have record numbers crossing the channel or we have a record numbers coming here in other ways. It's because the system, sadly, isn't working, and individuals who are waiting to be processed aren't being processed because the system has essentially collapsed. The Rwandan scheme appears to be designed as a divisive issue. It doesn't address the central point, which is an underfunded system, a system which is sadly dysfunctional, and a system which needs to be brought up to, modernised, and needs to be working efficiently. It isn't.
Yeah, but the House of Commons already passed it, so it appears only the House of Lords seems to agree with you, Tassadat. I'm wondering if the British government or the British Parliament does not regard Rwanda as a safe country. They've already pocketed $300 million. I suppose it's maybe pounds, but $300 million so far from London. President Paul Kagame says, if this doesn't work out, he's willing to give all of that money back.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but really, would that be realistic in the long term?
What would be realistic? Giving the money back, or the scheme itself? Let me explain about the scheme itself. Firstly, the current Conservative government were elected on a manifesto which said that they would comply with international law in the processing of asylum claims. That was the manifesto which they were elected on. During this current Parliament, they introduced the Rwanda policy. That wasn't in the manifesto, it wasn't voted on by the electorate, and as a consequence, many would argue, the government doesn't have a mandate to pass that legislation. So any suggestion that anybody is trying to frustrate the will of the British people it is highly questionable in light of the fact that the manifesto pledge said nothing about Rwanda and in fact said the contrary, that they would comply with international law, the very opposite of what the Rwanda bill is now attempting to do. In respect to the House of Lords, as I'm sure you will appreciate, the House of Lords are part of the British Parliament. It's their job as the upper chamber of the legislature to check and amend, add to, clarify, advance alternative suggestions for legislation. Once that's done, it then goes back to the House of Commons for further consideration. The House of Commons then has a number of options. They can accept the amendments, they can reject the amendments, they can compromise on the amendments, or they can simply send the entire bill back for a further consideration by the House of Lords, and that's known as ping-ponging, where it bounces back and forth between the two houses over a period of time. And if that happens, bearing in mind that we are very close to an election, there's a real chance that the bill itself could not pass. I'll happily discuss with you when you're ready about the practicalities of the scheme, because I think that's very interesting that your viewers may want to hear about that as well.
Well, thank you, Tassadat. It sounds like we will have to expand this conversation some other time. Thank you for speaking with us. We appreciate you joining the program today.
Thank you.
In other news, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa for corruption and human rights abuses. Its sanctions also affect other senior leaders in the country, blocking their assets in the U.S. and barring them from unofficial travel there. The new sanctions replace a broader program that was introduced 2 decades ago. The White House is concerned about what it terms gross abuses of political, economic, and human rights. It says it is refocusing and elevating its efforts to hold individuals and entities that are responsible for this exploitation accountable. Some of the affected officials are the First Lady, Vice President, Defense Minister, and other senior officials, including members of Zimbabwe's National Police and Central Intelligence Organization. South Africa's gross domestic product experienced a modest increase of 0.1% in the fourth quarter of last year. Notably, the transport, storage and communications sector surged by 2.9% during the same period, contributing 0.2 percentage points to the overall GDP growth. Economic activities saw a boost in land and air transport alongside transportation support services and communication sectors. Statistician General Risenga Maluleke addressed the media earlier today to discuss these developments.
We can see that the industry that performed the most was transport, having performed at 0.2 of a percentage point, followed by mining and quarry, as well as personal services and finance that contributed 0.1 of a percentage point. But those that had a drawdown in the most were trade at negative 0.3 percentage points of a percentage point, and followed by agriculture at negative 0.2 of a percentage point. And indeed, we can see that it's just a coincidence that transport happens to have grown the strongest and indeed contributed the most. But there are times when the growth, the 2.9 that we are seeing of growth, sometimes that growth is not correspondent to the contribution that such a sector has made. Now, we want to make comparisons, and it's the first time we bring these kinds of comparisons to be able to demonstrate that what happened in the third quarter on the left-hand side and what sustains as we report on the fourth quarter. We can see, for example, that in the area of trade, we can see that perhaps right up there with agriculture, it's a second quarter. From the third quarter, it had indicated a negative growth. It continues to show a negative growth. And of course, we can see that construction shows the same, trade shows the same. But there are those that have moved sideways. And indeed, when we look at the sectors, we are saying that the primary sector is the one that contracted by 2%, whereas the secondary and tertiary sector retained a growth of 0.2%.
Well, China's annual 2 sessions, a highly anticipated event on the country's political calendar, began on Monday with the opening of the second session of the 14th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the CPPCC. As the world's second largest economy endeavors to solidify the momentum of economic recovery in its pursuit of Chinese modernization, the sessions carry immense significance for China and beyond. Amid a solemn yet spirited atmosphere, the Great Hall of the People in the heart of Beijing welcomed more than 2,000 members of the CPPCC National Committee, a top political advisory body from diverse sectors of society. President Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders took their seats on the rostrum in a nod of congratulations on the commencement of the event. In his address, Chairman of the CPPCC National Committee, Wang Huning, presented a work report to the session, saying in 2024, the CPPCC will focus on advancing Chinese modernization, actively offer suggestions, and foster broad consensus. The CPPCC aims to pool wisdom and strength so that the country will achieve the economic and social development objectives for the entire year.
and reinforce.
Finally on the program, delegates from various countries took part in the World Youth Festival 2024 parade, there it is, at the Olympic Park in the Syria's Federal Territory in Russia. A photo shows delegates from different countries dressed in costumes and carrying flags, marching alongside animators. Participants also perform traditional songs and dances. World Youth Festival, which runs from March 1st to the 7th, intends to develop international youth cooperation and brings together about 20,000 young people. However, the regional program will take place on March 10th to 17th, during which the participants will visit 30 Russian cities. The Serious Innovation Science and Technology Center is the first federal territory in Russia, located on the Black Sea coast near the city of Sochi. Really excited young people. Well, thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.